Hello again, and welcome to Law and Society. This is where legal and social issues come together. Andrew Stevenson is with us, attorney at law, Stevenson Criminal Defense.com. Did I say that right?
You did, Mark.
And you always bring us such interesting topics. And one of these days, I'm just going to let the recorder roll, and we're going to just have a train of Andrew tell us a story. Yes.
Yeah, I do have a lot of good stories.
You do. So what's our topic today? It says on my sheet, intent and character evidence.
That's correct. We're going to talk a little bit about intent. It's kind of a overlooked issue in the law by most people, but it's actually what I spend most of my time focusing on.
Okay.
The law generally requires that before a person can be convicted of a crime, that there has to be two things.
Okay.
First of all, there has to be an act, either a voluntary act, you do something such as pull a trigger on a gun.
Right.
Or you fail to do something which you're supposed to do.
Like control your vehicle.
Control your vehicle or not put your child in a car seat. That's another failure to act.
Okay.
And most people understand that, and when they examine a case or hear a story in the news about something that happened, they generally ask the question, well, did he do it? Well, oftentimes, whether or not somebody did something isn't really the legal issue. The issue is what was in their mind at the time that they did it. So it's one thing to say that a person pulled a trigger and a gun went off and somebody died, but does that automatically make it murder? And the answer is no.
Okay.
It could be a lot of different things. And that's because there are different levels of a person's intent, what's going on in the person's mind at the time. 4
levels of intent here, right?
Yeah, and the criminal code provides for 4 different levels of intent, if you will. And the first of which is something called purposely. And that is when an individual does something specifically because they intend and want the outcome to occur. So I don't like my neighbor. I get mad at him. I wait for him to come home from work, and I go out with a gun and I shoot him because I want him to be dead. That is prior calculation, purposeful murder. That's a very simple example.
Okay, that's purposely.
That's purposely. And usually when there are certain crimes that require purposely, for example, murder is one.
Right. We just had a case, a really sad case, abduction in Mansfield. The guy kidnapped his ex-girlfriend,
right,
and she wound up dead. And they both wound up dead over it. But that was purposeful.
That's purposeful. And there are other unique crimes such as bribery or perjury or kidnapping, which require this specific intent.
Right.
And then kind of the next level down, and the most common level of intent in the law is something called knowingly. And that's where a person is aware that their conduct will probably cause a certain result.
And people will hear these terms when you hear them on the news that he knowingly did this.
Right.
These are the actual legal terms.
These are the actual legal terms.
Yeah, so knowingly.
Knowingly. So if we stick with our gun example, if you fire a gun into a crowd of people, you may not be wanting to specifically harm or kill any particular person, but by shooting into the crowd, you are aware that you're probably going to cause that result.
Okay.
And that would be a different level. That would be your manslaughter charge, as most people would think of it. And so it's the most common offense. It's for robbery and assault, theft, things along those lines.
You have possession of drugs down here.
Yeah,
You're knowingly possessing an illegal substance?
Yes, that's what the law requires before you can be convicted of trafficking or knowing or possession of a drug. You have to know that you're in possession of a drug, which comes back to the old law school question, which is, if I offer to, you say you want to buy cocaine from me, and in fact I actually sell you baking powder, and you don't know the difference, are you guilty of possession of a drug?
No.
No.
I have baking powder.
Right. But what you are guilty of is attempted.
Right.
Because you believed that you were in possession of drugs.
Prove it. Prove that I believe that.
That's where we come down to how do you prove intent.
But if I have real cocaine in my pocket and I say, Andrew, would you like to buy some cocaine? I am purposely selling you.
You're knowingly selling. Yeah.
I'm knowingly. It doesn't rise to purposely.
No, it doesn't.
At that point.
Yeah. No.
I'm knowingly selling you cocaine.
And they reduce the standard to make it easier to convict a person.
Okay.
So when they choose these, they realize that once they say purposely, it's going to be tougher to convict somebody.
Yeah.
If they made it negligently, you could convict people easier. So purposely is harder to convict than knowingly, and knowingly is harder to convict than reckless.
But purposely, if you have a murder trial and you want to charge them with aggravated murder,
Yes.
then that's where that rises to that. And you
Aggravated
have to
murder,
charge them.
generally, yes. You have to show that they purposely, either for murder or aggravated murder, unless it's called felony murder, but that's a whole other show.
And I'll say this, and just while we're talking about this, Andrews, you have a lot of experience with murder trials.
I do, yes.
And I just want to point that out that you. I know that we're not allowed to use the word expert. That's not a legal thing. But you are well versed in the mechanics of murder trials.
Yes.
Or murder procedures, right?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Murder proceedings. Because some of them, and this is a whole nother topic, but I was blown away by how many plea bargains actually happen in this country now.
Yeah, about 99% of all cases.
We're gonna do a show just on that.
We'll do a show on that next time.
Our next topic, or next
level
is recklessly. And this is, again, we hear about reckless homicide or reckless operation, whatever. You know, that's.
It is true. For example, recklessly, an example sticking with our gun. If you go out on New Year's Eve and shoot your gun up in the air, now chances are the bullet's going to come down and probably hit the ground, but there's also a chance it's going to come down and strike somebody.
Yeah, could hurt. Yeah.
Because what goes up must come down, and everybody knows just because you shoot it in the air, the bullet comes down at the same speed that it went up.
Right.
And it can harm people and kill people.
Well, and reckless, this is where yelling fire in a crowded theater might be is a reckless act that could cause harm, right?
Or if you want to sit out in your driveway and play Quick Draw McGraw, practice your Quick Draw McGraw skills, and you use an actual loaded gun, and surprisingly it goes off because you are not as good as you think you are.
Right.
That's another example of reckless. So there is a charge called reckless homicide. And it is when a person's behavior is such. You see it sometimes, you used to see it a lot with people who were excessive rates of speed.
Yeah.
120 miles an hour, things along those lines.
Yeah, that's where I'm,
It's a more severe charge than if you were to get in an accident and you're turning left and you just don't see the pedestrian who's crossing the crosswalk. That would be a case of being negligent. If you are going 120 and you run into somebody, then that's a more severe charge.
And that's where police chases, these high speed.
That's another charge.
And that's a whole different bailiwick in itself, because police departments are now saying, is it worth, causing those accidents?
I've always wondered why they do it. But.
Me too, because, as an engineer by education, I know you may outrun a police car, but you can't outrun a radio.
Yeah.
So.
And then the last level is negligent. And that's the lowest in the criminal world. Accidents happen. People are careless.
There's a lot of cases of negligence, right? Negligent, whatever.
And most of them are settled in the civil court.
Right.
But in the criminal court, it does exist. Back to our gun example, that's when you clean the gun or you make a mistake, you simply mishandle the weapon.
Well, I thought
with no intent for it to go off.
Well, I joked before going on the air. I read that and I said, "Well, Dick Cheney, goes hunting and shoots somebody, a hunting accident." And that's happened. I had a friend that actually shot somebody in the leg, a hunting accident. It happens.
It happens. It's just negligence, just improper handling of a firearm, and it occurs.
Right.
And in their mind, they had no intent. They didn't want the outcome to come. So it's very different. So what goes on in a person's mind does affect the culpability. It affects the level of the offense, and it's also where a lot of the fight is between defense attorneys and prosecutors.
With these four levels, the four definitions here and levels of intent, that's where, as a defense attorney, that's where your pleadings, there's a lot of gray between.
There's a lot of gray between those. It is. Yeah. And now there are some crimes for which they impose what's called strict liability, and those are ones for which what your intention is does not matter. You can be found guilty simply by doing the act.
Okay.
You tend to see this in two areas. Traffic code violations. For example, nobody cares legally from a standpoint. If you're speeding, if you're going over the speed limit, it doesn't matter why.
Right.
It doesn't matter. Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, I didn't mean to. I was just following traffic. The law says you cannot go over the speed.
Right. It's like
And
all
if you
those
do, you
people
get-
coming down Columbus Street behind me when I'm in the school zone going 20, and they
Right.
run right up my tailpipe, and I'm
Right.
like, no, I'm doing 20 through
That's
here.
what it says.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
also tend to see it with DUI.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that you didn't want to be impaired. You
Yeah.
didn't think you were impaired. If you're over the limit, it's a strict liability. offense.
Especially given the amount of marketing, the amount of just sheer advertising out there saying buzz driving is drunk driving,
Right.
over the limit, under arrest. I mean, there's no excuse. So those are strict. They don't. There's no. He was just being negligent. No.
We also the other area we tend to see it is in sex crimes.
Okay, tell us about that a little
Well,
bit.
the classic example is statutory rape. Mm-hmm. If the person's under a certain age, you simply cannot have engaged in sex. It doesn't matter. You didn't want to. She was said yes. It just mattered. Those are
It's a strict
examples.
liability, but so you can't say she looked 18.
Right.
That doesn't work.
Doesn't matter.
All right.
So then the other issue is that comes up a lot is voluntary intoxication.
Okay.
And we see this, and it's individuals who are so intoxicated that they really couldn't form the requisite intent, the intent to do something, because they're just either are so high on drugs or
Yeah.
so high on
I was so
alcohol.
drunk I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
Yeah.
The law says that's not a defense. So
Well, it says right there. I was so drunk I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I just ad-libbed that, but there it is. It's in your notes.
It's
Awesome.
in my notes. So yeah, it applies to drugs as well, which is why I cannot. I'm seeing more and more, and we are seeing more and more cases involving drugs and guns, and it is almost becoming nearly epidemic. The number of
You're not talking
almost-
drug deal going bad. You're talking
No, I'm
somebody
talking-
high on drugs.
I'm talking about people surrounding drugs who use drugs, who then turn around and use guns. There's they
because the inhibitions filter is gone at that point.
correct, and it really is just a really horrible mix.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's becoming a problem.
Drugs and guns do not mix.
Alcohol and guns don't mix. I've had 2 cases in my career in
Let's-
which
yeah, go ahead.
I'll just finish this up. 2 cases in my career where I had to meet an individual who was charged with murder, and they literally had no memory of what they did.
They might not, but I bet you there was a witness that did.
Actually, in both cases, there was no eyewitness. But it's strange to talk to an individual who does not remember doing what they are accused. And this is murder.
Yeah.
And it's just sad. It was alcohol in both cases.
Okay.
But yes, it is possible to drink to the point where you don't recall. and
You black, yeah.
black out.
But and it's like, what did I do? Well, sometimes
It's pretty bad.
pretty bad.
Yeah.
You're listening to Law and Society. It's where legal and social issues come together. Andrew Stevenson, attorney at law. StevensonCriminalDefense.com. If you find yourself hearing those words, you're under arrest, you have the right to remain silent. Our suggestion, as always, is
I want my lawyer.
I want my lawyer, and then shut your mouth.